My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Today we're going to talk about the difficult subject of suicide prevention, specifically in remote work situations like mining or logging camps. What unique challenges does this kind of isolation present? How much can a company really do to prevent suicidal thoughts or actions in their workers? We'll draw from our guests' experience in psychology, safety, and resource extraction to discuss some of these questions. Donna Carter has delivered step change projects in critical risk management, human performance, and suicide prevention across smelting, mining, utilities operations, and beyond. She earned her Master's of Science in Psychology from the University of Otago, and from there went into safety-related roles. As a solo pro consultant, she carries a wealth of knowledge that helps organizations bridge the gap between theory and operations, consistently bringing humanity, care, and applied systems thinking back into safety leadership. She's straight-talking and anti-dogmatic. There's never a dull moment in her work, and she always has time for a laugh. Donna joins us from Dunedin. Welcome.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
Good. Doing well. On the other side of the world, isn't the internet magic?
We love it.
So you have a background in psychology. How does research into behavior and human cognition inform your approach to safety?
Hugely. I see a lot of well-intentioned programs with the obvious aim of keeping people safe, but they often ignore what we know about human cognition and neuropsychology and decision-making and all that stuff. And so we often end up in situations where we're actually trying to force people to approach something in a way that's really unnatural for us to do that. And so wherever possible, I just try and share those insights in right-sized pieces for businesses so that we can just start to course correct a bit and make sure that our systems are brain-friendly and human-friendly so that we can get the best out of our people and out of our systems.
Let's talk a little bit about remote workplaces. Can you paint us a picture of the issue of mental health in remote workplaces? Like, how big of a problem is it? How does it come about? What can you share about that?
It's such a mixed bag. I think part of the issue of it is that most of the remote workplaces that we find ourselves in are usually in quite unforgiving physical environments. So they're either really, really hot, really, really cold, like that. They're at basically the extremes of where we would normally choose to live. And so I think you've got isolation, so you're very, very far away, hundreds of kilometers away from a town centre, or where you would have lots of the creature comforts that we're used to. You're living with the extremes of the environment, and then of course it's just a different way of living. So it's you've got to think differently about how you would approach something like trying to make improvements for people's mental health, and particularly around suicide prevention, because you don't have the same things available to you if you were to do the same sort of thing in a city. So it's just such a different way of life, which requires a really different approach.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with workers in remote settings? Like, how did this become an interest for you? Something that you look at in particular?
For me, it was when I moved to a remote mining town and as a safety advisor. So I was sort of midway in my career, and it was by chance. So it was because I had my background of psychology, and I was interested in the intersectionality between physical safety. So, we spend a lot of time and money on hazard ID, risk assessment, keeping people physically safe, and it was sort of at that time that the conversations around wellbeing were starting to bubble up, and we were starting to talk more about how do we take good care of our workers. And so it started to really become clear to me that there is a connection here, right? Like if people are coming to work and they are carrying any sort of burden, what we were seeing was that that definitely influences their ability to remain physically safe at work. And so that was sort of becoming really interesting to me. And then by chance, I was given the portfolio of the mental health. At the start, it was mental health awareness. We were wanting to just increase people's understanding of common mental health issues that people face. And because of the risk factor that when you're working remotely, the chance of you having a mental health, a mental illness, increases. So we were trying to do our, good duty of care in that space. And then at the same time, we were noticing more and more reports of attempts and people losing their life to suicide. And so it very quickly shifted from mental health awareness it wasn't enough. We actually needed to have a really strategic approach to bringing getting a hold on what was going on with people taking their lives.
So you've mentioned living in extreme circumstances, temperatures, and you mentioned a lack of resources when you're isolated, you're away from a town. Are there any other challenges that are unique or that people might not think about in terms of remote work camps as compared to a 9 to 5 job? Or are those the main things?
No, I think for a lot of people who who come to these sort of to these roles, to these jobs, a lot of people work away from their families. There were families there where in the town where I was, but they're families that are away from their extended family. So you've either got people by themselves, or you've got sort of the family unit of mum, dad, and the kids, but there's no extended family. So you become very reliant on the community around you, which is not at all a bad thing, but there needs to be obviously some structure and process to support that. So if you're not from that area and you've come to work in this town, you're starting from ground zero. You've got nothing. You've got no contacts. You've got no network. And so if you're already having a hard time and you're alone and you're in this really bizarre place that doesn't look like anything that you've ever been to before, it can be really confronting and it can just compound what someone's already going through.
Yeah, so I actually know someone who used to be a logger in Canada. He would go to logging camps, and he did it in the time before the internet and in the time after the internet. And he said it was almost harder to be able to do video chats with his family when he was away. He actually missed them more than the time. So I was just wondering, does that kind of technology help, hinder, or is it kind of a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of isolation and loneliness?
I definitely think it's a mixed bag. I think, and we see this now, right, across society where it becomes easy to create online connections, but many people don't have in-person or real life connections that they would spend the same amount of time with. And we know that the in-person stuff is so powerful as a protective factor against all manner of mental health issues, and definitely with suicide prevention. So I think it has a place with opening up connection, and particularly if you're working away from your family, being able to see them and video call and all that really nice stuff. But at the same time, I do think that we're all guilty of falling into that trap of leaning more into the superficial connections that you can create on social media. And I, when you're not feeling great, it's an easy option, right, to hide away at home in your space that you're comfortable in, and not go out and connect with people in real life, because they'll see you, they can talk to you, they might work out that something's not right, and you might not want them to know at that point. So I think I would go 50-50. There's good and bad on both sides of the coin.
You've kind of just led into this, but vulnerability plays a big role in whether someone who has suicidal ideation reaches out for help. Knowing that, how can safety professionals work towards creating the kind of trust that is needed for someone to speak up if they are struggling?
I was hoping you were going to ask this question. It's such a big question. And it's something that to build that trust and to create that space takes a phenomenal amount of work. And it's not something that you can just create in a month. And then decision making, at a senior exec level, and I would say misinformed, because I don't think that it would ever be intentionally harmful, but misinformed decision making at that exec level can just erode months, years worth of work. I can share a real life example of that for our listeners. So we spent almost a year building up this community approach to suicide prevention in our remote mining town. So this involved, we had the mental health and suicide prevention working group within the mine, and that was made up of a number of different people from across the business, representative of all the working groups. We also had, where we were mining was on Indigenous land in Australia, so we had to make sure, and why wouldn't you, that we had an Indigenous voice throughout this as well, because the local Indigenous people were affected at a greater rate than what the non-Indigenous were. And so we needed to make sure that everything that we were doing was inclusive of that as well. So there was the mine working group, and then of course you can't do this in isolation. So we also had a community working group. So we would basically replicate what we were doing, but on a community scale. So the little mining town, we made sure that we had key people from that town. We had the local pastor. We had, some people from the school. We had Indigenous people who had lived in that town their whole life and could inform, making sure that what we were doing was respectful to their view of mental health and suicide as well. So it was just making sure that everyone who could play a positive role in this had a voice at the table to inform how are we going to do this and what do we actually need. So it was lots of conversations and lots of just piece by piece, and making sure that what we were doing was visible, that we were providing education for parents, we were providing education for leaders at the mine, we were bringing in subject matter experts. So that was one of the key things, was because of the seriousness of what we were trying to change, we needed to make sure that our approach was actually backed, had clinical backing. So we made sure that we engaged the local GP, and there was a small hospital there. So we had, what we were doing was informed by their recommendations as well. So just making sure that everything that we were doing was clinically supported, and also that if we were asking people to be upstanders or to be connectors or mental health first aiders, that we were giving them appropriate training, so that, because we don't want to cause more harm. So months and months and months of conversations. And then there was education. So education for the guys coming in they were called education days. So they would come in and they would be in a big training room, and we would talk about the stuff that they did not want to talk about. And it was interesting reflecting on the time from when we started doing that. Right at the beginning, I would have people walk out, I would have people stand up. So you'd be in a room of 50 operators, plant maintainers, and you'd start this conversation, and they weren't backwards and coming forwards. They'd say, I'm not doing this, colourful language, the whole shebang, and I would have people walk out. And then it was interesting because as we persisted with the conversation, and of course, while we're doing this, people are still losing their lives. So, we're having these conversations that people don't want to have. And I found that was almost the paradox of it, that I know I'm hurting you by standing here and talking about this stuff. I get that. And I know that you want me to shut up. But while I'm trying to bring this conversation to light and create this space for you so that you can raise the flag if you need to, we're still losing people that you all care about. And so you're hurting and you're suffering. And I know that I'm contributing to that hurt because you don't want to talk about this, but by not talking about it, it's going to continue. And so it was really tough in the beginning to actually get engagement. There was a wall there that we're not talking about this, we're not having anything to do with it. And so it was, and I've heard the analogy before of you can't blast someone with a fire hose and expect them to be standing at the end. So it was just drip by drip by drip. And then we got to a point where we could actually have really robust conversations about this. And, we brought in some really influential people to try and create that space as well. So, having some New Zealand girl stand up in front of a room of 50 men who, my impact was limited. So it was important that we brought in people who they were going to be relating to a bit more. And then sort of by proxy, they could see, oh, she actually is trying to help us. She wants us to be okay. And it would have been probably a year before I had the first person come up to me and have the conversation that we'd been hoping for. But it was a year of slow and steady and then building that trust. And then it became important that when we did have people who came forward, we needed to make sure that we had the right resources and the right people that we could connect them with to get them that urgent help that they needed. But in those moments when the people came forward, just to see the vulnerability and just the exhaustion, it was so obvious that they had been fighting this for so long and that they didn't have much left. And for them to come and say, and most of the time it was just, they would just either, I would be finishing my session at an E-day and walking out the door, and they'd just go, I need to talk to you. And they'd say it in that really gruff. And I'd think, oh God, I've offended someone again. Here we go. And, and then it was just I need your help. And that's all, but you could see through the gruffness, you could actually see that for them to have turned up on that day and to then say, I need your help. It was huge. And they were terrified. And so it just became so important that, for them to get to that point where they're going to ask for help, we absolutely cannot drop the ball at that point. We've got to make sure that we respond appropriately and get them to the people who can actually help them.
You had started with saying that trust can be eroded really quickly. Is there more to that particular kind of case study or story? Or
we had this man who, and he, I guess when you think of an Australian miner, he's the person that you would think of, worked there for years. His son worked there. He'd served in the army. He was gruff, a man who you just automatically had an immense amount of respect for. And I was, if I ever had to go over and talk to him about anything to do with safety, I was always, it's not that he wasn't mean, but he was just one of those no nonsense sort of people. So I'd think, oh, I've got to go and talk to him right now. What am I going to say? He just was one of those people, just tell me how it is. Don't waste my time. And so he appeared at my office door one day and I hadn't seen him for a while, and he was a shadow of who he was. And so you could see straight away that something was terribly wrong. And same thing, he said, I need to talk to you. And so he was just in such a terrible place. And it was just one of those moments I still remember it today. Like it quite literally took my breath away just to see this man who, I had only ever known him to be this big, gruff, no-nonsense man who, could take on the world. And then he was this shadow, and it just looked like he just had nothing left in the tank. And so we sat down and we had a conversation and, said things like, I haven't been sleeping and I keep forgetting things, and I'm getting in trouble because I'm not getting my work done. I'm coming in on weekends to try and sort it out, try and catch up, and nothing I'm doing is working. By this stage, he was in tears. And I just remember sitting there going, as a business, how have we got to this point with this person who has worked in this company for a very long time and has done their absolute best to perform in their role as you want them to, and something's not right. Like, it's so obvious that something is not right. And this is so much more than just someone not performing in their role. And so in that moment, we got him the help that he needed. But and I guess this is a big learning for me now. Back then when this was all happening, I was a safety advisor. Now I'm, much more wiser, have more years under my belt. And what we had failed to do as an organization when we decided that we wanted to make this change and try to make these, have this positive impact with our team at the mine and out in the community, we actually did not consider the the codependent work streams and policies within the business. And so what we ended up with in this particular situation was we had a man who was not performing in his role because he was mentally ill and needed some help and needed some time. Instead, what we did was he ended up being performance managed, which I found it incredibly upsetting. And I just remember when I found out, his son actually came to see me, and I just remember sitting there thinking, why are you doing this? He's not well. You wouldn't do this to someone if they'd broken their leg and couldn't walk up the stairs of the plant. You wouldn't say, I'm going to put you on a performance improvement plan now because you're not getting to where you need to be. And again, it wasn't that it was a malicious thing. It's the fact that it's that education gap where we're not thinking about, and we don't have the knowledge of, actually, we need to approach this in an entirely different way to what we've done before. And that conversation had been missed. And so in that instance, we let that man down, and it eroded a significant amount of trust across the wider business, because it then sent a very clear message that actually production and outcomes and all that other stuff is more important than getting people well again. And so if you're sick here and you put your hand up and say that you're sick, this is what's going to happen. And to come back from that, it was gut-wrenching, and it was incredibly frustrating. But also, you can only let people down in that way one time, really, before everything you say after that becomes questioned.
This touches on that, but before you've described your approach as anti-dogmatic. So where does the idea of dogma come into the discussion of suicide prevention? I think it comes in what you've just described, but yeah, tell me.
It has to, when you're dealing with groups of people in unique operating environments, we have to think beyond ourselves and beyond our expertise. And so there is no place for ego, and there is no place for being the smartest person in the room, because it's not about being the smartest person in the room. And so the only way that you can actually do this properly is it's got to be by community for community. Like it's that whole many hands make light work. And you've got to do what's right for the community at the time. So something that might have worked for a community on the other side of Australia might not necessarily be the right fit for the community that you're dealing with at that time. And so, and I think because there's so many resources out there, and obviously a lot of academia about this, it's very easy to become very formulaic in how we do something like this. And that's where I see the dogma set in, where we go, right, first we have to do this, and then we have to do this, and then we have to do this, and there was this research paper, and there's this book, and like, that's all great, and it should inform, but there's got to be flex, and you've got to capture the voice of the community, because that's who you're serving. When you're trying to do something like this, you have to listen to what the community are telling you, because that's who it's for. And when you take that approach, there is no place for dogma, because you actually need to try and do different things until you get the result that you're looking for. And so I think when we talk about that poor man that was put on a performance improvement plan, that was just dogma, right? This is what we do when people aren't performing in their role. This is what we've always done. This is how we handle that. We don't have any other process for when people are mentally unwell, and that's why they're not performing in their role. We've only got this one process that we've always used. So that's what we're going to keep using. And so by taking that really dogmatic approach and that really black and white thinking, we've gone and we've caused harm. when if we had just sort of stopped and been a bit more flexible in our thinking and more nuanced, I feel like we could have got to a place where, yes, he wasn't performing in his role. That was never up for debate. But we know why he wasn't performing in his role. He wasn't coming to work and saying, I can't be bothered today. I'm just going to play on the computer and eat my lunch. That we know that's not what he was doing. So why put him through a punishing process for something that he has no control over it? He's done everything he can do to get himself well again. And it's a matter of time and whatever the doctor decides is the right approach for that person. And I see a business's role is you are going to support that person through that, not punish them.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned this before. One of the issues is that there are competing goals, right? There's the goal of wellness, but I mean, in terms of accountability, managers are accountable for production usually, right? So I guess that's how it plays out. Is there any other way that you've seen this tension play out? Like,
it's hard, right? Because if you're private sector, you're in the business to make money. And particularly if you're in big mining companies, the big resource companies that's earn as much money as you can, and it's all on production and productivity and output and all the rest of it. And I get that. But we have to be, I think, if I could go back in time and, if I knew back then what I know now, there's got to be conversations had at every level. So whilst it's, it's amazing and it's inspiring to be part of departments and even sites that want to change our approach to things like mental health awareness and wellbeing and suicide prevention, there actually has to be conversations that go right up into the boardroom, because particularly when you're in a remote mining town where we're not just talking about one or two people per 100 who are unwell, the number is higher. And so we're going to have decreases in productivity while these people are coming back to wellness. And that conversation was never had. And so I think if there are businesses out there who are wanting to do this properly and wanting to take, a long-term approach to this, where they genuinely give life to these sorts of initiatives, then we have to make peace with the fact that when people are not well, they are not going to be as productive. And we know that. We absolutely know that. It's a common sense thing. It's not rocket science. But it's accepting what that looks like on the balance sheet, basically. So we can't have it both ways. And I think we owe it to our workers that if we're going to start having these conversations, and then we've got to be honest about how far that goes. And, if we're happy to support you, as long as you remain productive, then say that. Be transparent about how far it's going to go. I think because otherwise you pour petrol on someone who's already on fire. You're not helping when we offer that false hope. And I think we need to recognize that when people are in crisis, for them, all hope is gone. And so to wave something like hope in front of someone and then rip it away. That none of this is done maliciously, but that is what we end up doing. And it just causes an incredible amount of harm. And we need to be responsible for that. We really need to understand the implications of what it is that we're doing when we engage in those sorts of decisions.
You talked about intention. Do you think most company leadership roles or people in those roles are kind of aware of this tension, or are they aware of the resulting mixed messages that workers get, or are they just too ensconced in their own circle of concerns and their area of the work?
I think it would be a mixed bag. I definitely feel I feel deeply for senior execs, because I think most businesses have got competing KPIs where people always feel that tension of, you want me to do this thing over here, but then you also want me to do this thing over here. And they're in direct competition with each other and I don't know what you want. I totally get that. And I see it a lot with my clients, particularly when we're talking about safety, just in general. But then we do, I think, I do think that we've got some leaders who are very much of that. I call it that old-fashioned belief that you leave your problems at the gate, Whatever's bothering you from outside of work, you just leave that at the gate and you come in here and you do your work. And then when you go home, you can be sad or you can be upset about something or whatever. And we know that that's not possible. You're not two different people. So if you're carrying some sort of emotional burden, that stays with you wherever you're going. You can't run away from it. And we know that now. But I do think that we do have people in leadership roles who genuinely believe that if you try hard enough, you can just park your issues at the gate and come to work and do your work and not be a nuisance and go home. And that is a harmful belief. And I also think it's not helpful either for things like productivity, and because then you just end up with presenteeism where people come to work and go, I'm here, physically I'm here, but mentally I'm out the gate. So you're no better off.
Let's talk a little bit about scale. I think you came up actually, or you shared some really good ideas at the beginning of the conversation about this. But when I was thinking about this, mental health is extremely personal. It requires a lot of trust to ask for help. And even if safety managers on site are able to develop that level of trust, which is an accomplishment in and of itself, how is it possible then to scale that across a large corporation? I mean, maybe it's not, but how would you go about it, I suppose? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think it is. And it's that nuanced approach of there are definitely things that you should do, but you need to do them your way and put your community's flavor on it. So absolutely, you need to have some sort of dedicated group of people who are driving it, and they need to be representative of the people that you're trying to help. So if we're talking specifically about remote work towns, whether it's mining or logging or anything, we need to make sure that we're doing both the work site work group and the community work group, because it's the community that's going to provide all of the protective factors and the resources that we need to help get these people back onto the path up towards their version of wellness. And so you can't do that if you don't engage with your community and with those groups of people in your community. It's also a really quick way to find out, what are we missing? What is all the good stuff that we've got here in this community, and what is the stuff that we absolutely need that we don't have? And now we've got to start either lobbying, or we need to find resource, whether it's money or whatever, to make sure that our people have access to whatever that missing resource is. So, and we did a bit of that with the community group, and we ended up, there's lots of grants that you can get, and we ended up getting some grants to bring up, I think it was 2 or 3 times a year, we brought up a child-specific counselling service that was focused on suicide prevention in preteens. To even say that out loud, that a service like that is needed, it's heartbreaking, but that's what we were dealing with. And so finding those gaps and saying, right, we don't have anything here, and a remote video conversation is not appropriate. We need people on the ground. So what is that going to look like? What can we do? And who's going to pay for it? So it was all those conversations. And I think that that's really important and a really good first step. Like anyone, anywhere could do that with the right group of people. And again, it's about parking egos and working together collaboratively to really quickly work out what is going on here and who needs help and what help have we got on hand and what do we need to bring in and how are we going to do that.
When you talk about community groups in that sense, did you find communities to be really welcoming of this sort of thing? I mean, did they feel that, no, we've already got our own resources, we're good? Or because you think about suicide in preteens, you could make the argument, poorly, I think, that doesn't affect workers. But if your child is the child who's struggling, it is absolutely going to affect you at work. So what was the community response?
Once we were talking about it, so once it was really clear that this was something that the conversation about this was not going away, it very quickly became, I would get emails from people saying, I want to help. Like, what can I do to help? Can I be on the community group? Or I know a person doing this, or I've got a contact here. And so it very quickly became all hands on deck. And I think it was because so many people were hurting. So many people had lost someone, or within their immediate family, or they had lost a friend or an uncle, or it was very rare to know someone in the community who had not been affected by suicide in some way. And so I think once the conversations were happening and we were doing the education, and I had a day where I was delivering a suicide prevention talk, and I talked for a while, and then it was a video that we played of different. It was men from different rural communities talking about their journey from having suicidal thoughts to getting help and then to living their version of great. And the morning that I was going over to do the talk, one of the ladies that I worked with who had lived in the town for a very, very long time, she said, "Oh, you're not going to go over and do that talk today, are you?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, why?" And she said, "Oh, that's the crew of the brother who passed away last week." And it was that sort of, do I or don't I? And then I rang up the crew leader and I said, "I've only just found out, is this, what do you want to do?" And he said, "Well, if we don't talk about it, it's going to keep happening." So I said, "All right, if I've got your support, I'm happy to come and talk about it, but I'm not expecting that it's going to go particularly well." And so, we tread really lightly. We're really careful with how we spoke about it. But absolutely, I think I'd been talking for about 5 minutes, and 2 or 3 guys got up and said, "F this, we're not doing this, we're not talking about this." And they walked out. And then a couple more, the more that I spoke, the more people stood up. And then it was actually the brother who had lost his brother. He stood up and he swore at all of them and said, if more colourful language than what I'll use here, but in a nutshell, if we keep walking out and refusing to talk about this, then we're going to lose more people that we care about. And it sort of stopped everyone in their tracks, and we continued with the conversation. And it was just such a, I felt really cruel actually running that education day. There were people who were crying, there were people who were not particularly happy with me, but you could, I guess, just having that man's blessing to continue having that conversation at such a difficult time. And I felt that was sort of the point where we turned the corner, where people realized that, yeah, it's a hideous conversation to be having, but what's the alternative?
Yeah, and it probably meant a lot that it came from the person who was closest, right?
Yeah.
Who was not that you can quantify these things, but who was perhaps suffering the most, right?
Yeah.
That was the person who said, "No, we do have to talk about this." So, yeah, I would think that having kind of the buy-in of the leadership on the ground, so whether that's a team leader or whoever that is probably pretty key, because if you don't, I have a feeling that this kind of initiative wouldn't be very successful, or this kind of conversation.
Yeah. And I think, when you've small mining town situation, everybody knows everybody. And it's like your greatest strength, but also your greatest weakness. So you've got, if people can see that you're genuine and that you're trying to do the right thing by them, they will back you 100% of the way, and they will go out of their way to remove barriers, but they have to get to know you first. And so they make you earn it. They make you work for it. And especially if you're a Kiwi girl coming into an Australian mining town. And at that point in time, the All Blacks were caning the Wallabies. So it was...
Yes, I can see how that...
Yeah, so I had to work for it. But when you've got this really tight-knit community and word gets out that you're trying to help people and you're doing it as a community, so it's not just me going out on my own trying to fix things. I was part of an amazing working group. And then so you get people from like on the outskirts of the community saying, "Oh, well, we want to be involved in this." And so it just naturally grows and it naturally gets stronger and people come on board. And then once a handful of people come on board. Everyone came on board, basically. So it was, but then, like I said earlier, our greatest strength and our greatest weakness is because everybody is so tight-knit and looks out for each other. If it's perceived that you've let one of those people down, then very quickly the tide goes out and you've lost everybody. And so that is a key takeaway I would give to anyone is you've got to build trust and you've got to get as many people on board as you can. But if you drop the ball on that, then you're going to lose all those people very quickly because they are a community. And so you've got to look after that community.
This is maybe going to be the hardest question that I'll ask you, but if you had to boil down this kind of suicide prevention work in remote settings into one actionable step that a listener could maybe just sort of start the conversation, start that kind of initiative, what do you think the most important first step anyway should be?
I think the first step would be creating a way for people to provide their input on the scale of the issue, because it's one thing to, what I mean by that is it's one thing to get stats from your local health authority to say, oh, this many people this week or whatever. And then it's one thing to look at a pulse survey and go, oh, people are a bit upset at the moment, but that's just words on a page. It doesn't have any meaning. And so I think if you can create a forum where people can actually give you, and not so much to share their own problems, because you've got to build the trust for them to do that, but to share their perspective on what is going on in their town and in their community, and actually hear what they have to say and use that to shape that initial response of what how you're going to step out and how you're going to start doing this. I think that's incredibly powerful, and it shows people right from day one that you want to do this with them, not to them.
There are a few questions that I ask near the end of my interviews to everyone. And one of them is, where would you focus training for the next generation of safety professionals? So what skills do you feel might be overlooked in safety training or that should be focused on?
I love this question. I'll try not to get up on my soapbox.
No, please do. That's why you're here.
Look, I think we're in a really cool place with safety at the moment. I think the wheel is starting to turn towards a more humanistic approach, and blended with an understanding of systems. But historically, we teach people how to do risk assessments, and we teach people, here's your risk matrix. You're going to use this to assess the risk of a task or of a piece of equipment or what have you. And we make sure that everyone's got a procedure and we know how to do audits. And we treat people like they're just another part of the manufacturing process or another part of the mining process, that, person A is going to go and do that risk assessment and they're going to implement those controls, and then person B is going to verify that those controls are in place. And there is no mention anywhere around person A might be having a really terrible time and their brain is out to lunch, and you're going to ask them to go and implement that critical control that relies on them 100% doing that correctly and doing everything at the right time. And so what I'm seeing now, and what I try to advocate for in the work that I do, is we have to recognize that the basics of hazard ID and risk assessment rely so heavily on our own cognitive processes and how our brain's working. And if we're not looking after our brains, and as an employer, if we're not looking after our employees' brains, then people have been set up to fail before they even begin. And it's this, again, recognizing that people we're not robots. We've got thoughts and feelings, we've got stresses, we've got commitments outside of work, and we do not leave those at the gate. They come with us. I use the analogy of an invisible backpack, and no one can see it. No one knows how heavy it is. We've all got one. And, some days it's really, really, really heavy and you just want to throw the thing on the floor, but you can't. And we don't talk about that enough in safety. We talk about wellbeing, but we look at it as a standalone. Or we'll give people gym memberships and we'll put some fruit bowls in the break room. But we miss the connection between what does that mean in terms of keeping people physically safe when they're out interacting with all those hazards, with all the big energies that we have in our high-risk industries. So what I want to see is more of a focus on that, of actually that connection between brain and body and person and system, and that we're not talking, we need to get more humanistic in how we're talking about it, rather than looking at people as pieces of a process that need to be refined and made more efficient and made safer. Actually, we need to think about how our system around us interacts with those people, and how those people interact with the system, and take a more humanistic approach, so that we're building safe systems that are brain friendly and mind friendly. So if people are not at 100%, and in this day and age, for a lot of people, when are people at 100%? With everything that they're trying to manage at the moment, when are people at 100%? But our systems of work, and particularly our critical controls, rely on people being 100% on their game. That is a high risk game to play. So that's what I want to see. And we're slowly getting there. The conversations around work as imagined, work as done, that's heading in the right direction. So yeah, I'll get down off my soapbox now, Mary.
There might be, or there's probably some thought into just making processes a little more flexible when it comes to the humans. So for the example that you gave is someone who has to go do a critical control, it 100% has to be done right. If there was a system that people understood ahead of time, that there was like a step where they're like, am I up to this today? And if it was clear for them to be honest and saying, you know what? No, the baby cried all night. I can't do this, or whatever. I don't think that I can do this safely. And if there was zero stigma in them then stepping to a second and saying, you know what, for this shift, could you please do some kind of flexibility like that? I mean,
I'm glad you said that, actually, because I've been developing, I've called it the survival mode risk assessment tool. And it's for exactly that. It's for leaders to say, hey, we've got a big shutdown in a couple of weeks. This is how I've allocated my team members and who's going to be doing what. Are we good to go? And so it's a really quick diagnostic tool that teams can use. And I feel like I've struck the balance between, because people don't want to talk about their problems all the time. They don't want to come to work and say, hey, supervisor, I'm not feeling great right now. Like, it takes a huge amount of time for people to get to that point. And so this tool is actually anonymous, because we don't need to know individual people. The team leader just needs to know, as a team, I've got people dealing with this category of emotional stress, and we are not good to go. Well, I cannot have these people implementing these critical controls. So we either have to change how we're going to do that, build in more capacity so that if someone mucks it up, we've got a backstop, or worst case scenario, we're not going to use this team at all. They're going to go and do something else, and we'll get a different team to do that part of the work. But those sorts of conversations are rare. And so that's where I see this tool actually being of benefit to people, because it opens up, you only need to have that little bit of the conversation where someone's just saying, I'm not good to go. They don't have to tell you why. They don't have to spill the beans if they don't want to, but they can say, please don't make me be the one to go and isolate that piece of equipment, because I probably will not do it right. And then we know what happens when equipment isn't isolated properly and people work on it. So, and that's where I want safety to get to, because we focus so much on the process stuff and not enough on the people actually doing the process.
Yeah, they're not mechanical pieces that move in a predictable way at all times.
Yeah, and I think when we think that we are focusing on them, it's down the lens of trying to error-proof them, which again, no, we can't. We're always going to make mistakes, because we're people, we're humans. It's about adjusting the system around us to hold us when we make those mistakes, so that we don't make a mistake and blow something up. We make a mistake and there's a backstop there, so that we can mitigate that before we blow something up.
Yes, ideally, yes.
Yeah, that's what we would like.
If you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, whatever point you feel that started, what's one piece of advice that you might give to yourself?
Oh, I think I got a bit carried away with the academia and the research. And I had an operations leader say to me, and he, like, to this day, he's been a mentor for many years, and I just hold him in such high regard. And I went over on my high horse and was lecturing him. I can't actually remember what the conversation was, but I was lecturing him about something. And I remember saying, oh, the research says this and the research says that, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that. And I remember he just so calmly, he said, if you say the word research to me one more time, I'm not going to let you back in my department. And I just remember the way, when someone can say something so calmly that it is actually aggressive. And I just remember going, okay. And then I walked away and I thought about it I sat with it for weeks and I sort of realized I'm being a dick. Like it's great to be informed by research and of course, like absolutely, but we don't need to weaponize it. And I think that happens a lot in health and safety where we get a bit carried away with, and this is where this whole anti-dogmatic thing comes from for me, is you can actually turn a lot of people off and it's almost anti-engaging to be going around smacking people up the side of the head with research and the latest, greatest thing, when actually we just need to take a holistic approach. We can take the good bits from all sorts of things and still be really good at what we do. We don't need to weaponize who's read the latest book or who's done the latest paper because it's not helpful. And particularly for people who aren't safety professionals, they don't care. They just want you to help.
So how can our listeners who are interested in this learn more about some of the topics in the discussion today? Are there any books or organizations or websites that you recommend?
So I would recommend, particularly if they're wanting to start looking at what can they do within their own organizations. So when I did this big suicide prevention project, the two main resources that I used, particularly in the early days, to get my head around how do we do this in a workplace and how do we do this as community, they're both Australian based, but they're fantastic resources. So there's Beyond Blue, and then the other one is the Black Dog Institute. And so we actually use them to do a lot of our leadership training to build up the leadership literacy around mental illness and suicide prevention and just what leadership through that looks like and what's helpful, what's good practice, what's not so helpful, and a lot of really good free resources on there as well. So just to get the conversation going and to get you started, two great resources.
So those are groups that you can look up on the web and and get there. Okay. And where can our listeners find you on the web?
So I'm on LinkedIn. So if you just look up Donna Carter, you should find me. And I've got a website, thepersonfactor.co.nz.
And for our American listeners, that's .nz.
Oh, yeah.
It's Z for me, but that's our show for today. Thank you so much for your insights, Donna.
Thank you. It's been great being here. And if anyone ever wants to have a chat, just message me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a chat.
Thank you to our listeners. If you have a moment, please rate, review, or subscribe to our show. It only takes a minute and it helps us tremendously to get the word out. As always, my thanks goes out to the Safety Labs team and all their efforts to help support our listeners in keeping people safe at work every day. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.